I knew something was wrong the second the key refused to turn. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't even the grief, which had wrapped around me like wet fabric since the moment the heart monitor flattened it. Was the sound. The lock clicked, but it didn't catch. I pulled the key out slowly, staring at it like it had betrayed me. The porch light was still on. I had left it that way when the ambulance took Ethan 3 nights ago. The wreath I had hung in December sagged slightly to one side. Everything looked the same, except the door would not open. I tried again, nothing. The bouquet from the hospital slipped slightly in my hand. The lilies were already browning at the edge. I hadn't meant to bring them home, but I couldn't leave them in the car either. I bent down and reached beneath the third brick from the left. The spare key was still there. I stood, inserted it, turned it, spun uselessly. The air left my lungs. In a thin, silent exhale, that's when I noticed the curtains. They were wrong. The soft beige linen panels I had ironed myself were gone. In their place were thick maroon drapes with tassels, heavy and theatrical, pulled tight like someone had staged a scene. I stepped closer to the window. Through a thin slit between fabric and frame, I saw boxers stacked along the hallway wall, a floral armchair I had never purchased, and on the coffee table, resting casually beside Ethan's old chessboard, sat Diana's porcelain teacup. My mother-in-law's teacup. My stomach tightened. The front door opened before I knocked. Diana stood there in a fitted black coat, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her lips painted a shade too red for mourning. "Rachel," she said gently, "you're back." My voice came out hoarse. "Why can't I get inside?" She stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking the entrance with practiced precision. "You should have called," she replied. "We weren't expecting you today." My brain struggled to keep up. "This is my house." Diana tilted her head in a way that suggested pity. It was Ethan's house. Behind her I saw Mark, Ethan's older brother, carrying one of my storage bins down the hallway. "Where are my things going?" I asked. "Somewhere appropriate," Diana answered. "You'll have time to collect what's personal." The word personal landed like a slap. "I live here." She smiled softly. "No, dear, you don't." Silence expanded between us. "Ethan handled the mortgage," she continued calmly. "The deed was always under his name. With him gone, the house remains with his blood family." Blood family. I felt something inside me settle, not panic, not even rage. Clarity. Move, I said quietly. Diana's smile thinned. "I don't think that would be wise." Mark appeared behind her now, arms folded. "You should go," he said. "We're dealing with estate matters." Estate matters. My husband had been dead for 30 hours. I stared past them, into the living room. They'd already moved the couch, had replaced the framed photograph from our wedding with a portrait of Ethan from his college graduation. I looked back at Diana. "You changed the locks." "Yes." "You broke in." "The back door was unsecured." "You had no right." Her voice cooled slightly. "You had no children. No joint claim. No prenup protecting you. You were his wife, Rachel, not his legacy." The bouquet slipped from my hand and hit the porch. Something inside my chest cracked, not loudly, not violently. Just a clean break. I bent down slowly, picked up the flowers, and placed them carefully against the railing. Then I looked at her again. "You're making a mistake," I said. Diana folded her arms. "You're grieving," she corrected. "And grief makes people dramatic." I held her gaze. "You're making a mistake." She closed the door. The lock clicked from the inside. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the wood grain. Then I turned and walked back to my car. I did not cry, not yet. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but my breathing remained steady. Diana believed the house belonged to Ethan technically. It had 3 years ago. But 3 years ago, something happened she never knew about. And Ethan had made sure it would stay that way. 2 years earlier, Ethan had come home pale. Not tired, not stressed, afraid. Double quotes, they froze the accounts. He said quietly, dropping his briefcase near the door. His startup had been struggling for months. Investors were impatient. Revenue projections had missed their mark. Okay, I said gently. We'll adjust. They're reviewing the collateral. He added the house. I didn't respond immediately. Diana had always insisted the property be listed solely under Ethan's name when we purchased it. She called it financial clarity. At the time, Ethan didn't want conflict. I agreed. I shouldn't have. But I did. 3 days later, I made a call to my attorney. Not to remove Ethan, not to confront Diana. To protect what we were building. The mortgage was refinanced under a restructuring agreement. I injected the savings I had built quietly over years of freelance design work. My income statements supported the adjustment. The deed transferred during the refinance. Processed legally, cleanly, privately, Ethan knew. Diana did not. And when his business stabilized 6 months later, we never mentioned it again. Not because it wasn't important, but because peace felt more important now. Sitting in my car outside what had once been my front yard. I realized something else. Ethan had known his mother. He had known she would move quickly too. Quickly, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. There was one person I trusted with precision. Angela, I said when she answered. I need you. The next 48 hours unfolded like controlled fire. Angela didn't react emotionally when I told her what happened. She asked questions. Did they physically remove you? Yes. Did they threaten? Yes. Did you document anything? No. Good, she said. Good. They think you're unstable. That helps. By Wednesday afternoon, we had pulled the official deed records. Angela forwarded me the scanned copy. Owner of record, Rachel Monroe. Diana had not even checked. Confidence can make people lazy. By Thursday morning, Angela filed a formal unlawful entry notice. By Thursday afternoon, we had secured a temporary property protection order. By Thursday evening, a sheriff's cruiser sat outside my house. When I walked up the driveway, the maroon curtains were still hanging. The officer knocked. Diana opened the door. The expression on her face shifted only slightly when she saw me standing behind him. Mrs. Monroe, the officer said evenly. You are being asked to vacate the property. Diana laughed softly. There's been a misunderstanding. Yes, I said quietly from behind him. There has. She looked at me differently then. Not dismissive. Assessing. This home is legally registered to Rachel Monroe. The officer continued. You and your son have no claim. Diana's composure held for 3 full seconds. Then it cracked. That's impossible. It isn't, I replied. Mark stepped into view. You manipulated him. He snapped. I tilted my head slightly. Prove it. The officer gestured toward the driveway. You have 30 minutes. I stepped inside. The air smelled like Diana's perfume. I walked straight to the living room and pulled down the maroon curtains. Diana watched silently. You lied, she said finally. No, I answered calmly. You assumed? She moved closer. You think this is over? No, I said softly. I think this is beginning. They left, but they did not retreat. 3 days later, I received notice of a probate challenge. Diana was contesting the deed, transfer, claiming coercion, mental instability, undue influence. I stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then I remembered the envelope, the one Ethan had handed me casually one night after dinner. Keep this somewhere safe, he had said. I found it in the back of his desk drawer. A notarized postnuptial agreement. Signed, witnessed, dated, in the event of death. All property rights fully transferred to Rachel Monroe without contest. And clipped behind it, in Ethan's handwriting. If she tries something, don't argue. Just win. I sat on the floor and allowed myself one single tear. Then I stood up. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Diana wore black. She looked dignified, victimized, strategic. Her attorney spoke first. He framed her as a grieving mother seeking fairness. Angela spoke sickened. She framed Diana as someone who changed locks before the funeral. Documentation speaks louder than grief. The judge reviewed the deed, the postnuptial agreement, the mortgage, transferred the refinancing documents. Mrs. Monroe, the judge said calmly to Diana, "You have no standing." The gavel fell. It was over legally, but not emotionally. The funeral was held. 2 days later, Diana attempted to attend. She stood at the back of the chapel, watching. Angela stepped beside me. "Your call," she whispered. I walked down the aisle. Slowly. When I reached Diana, I didn't raise my voice. "You tried to erase me," I said quietly. "You don't get to stand here and pretend." She searched my face for weakness. She didn't find any. "You always thought he chose wrong," I continued. "He didn't?" I nodded once toward the door. She left without speaking. Months passed. Spring came. I replaced the front door entirely. New lock. New frame. New color. I repainted the living room. I reopened my design studio. Tree opened. Rosemary along the walkway. One afternoon, a letter arrived without a return address. 6 words typed in bold. "This will never be yours." I smiled. It already was. I buried the letter beneath the rosemary. Some things grow better when planted in the right soil, and some people only understand loss when control slips through their hands. Diana had tried to claim a house. What Ethan left me was far greater. Proof, protection, preparation, and something she would never possess: peace. The sheriff's cruiser pulled away at exactly 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because I was standing in the driveway watching Diana's car disappear at the end of the street. And the world felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a battlefield goes silent after the first wave. The maroon curtains were still hanging inside. I stepped back into the house slowly. The air felt disturbed, shifted wrong. They'd moved things, rearranged space, replaced small details with their own. My wedding photo was gone. I found it in a cardboard box in the hallway closet, face down. I did not cry. I carried it back to the living room and set it on the mantel where it had always been. Then I walked room by room. Inventory. Kitchen drawers had been reorganized. Diana's preferred brand of tea now filled my cabinet. My ceramic mixing bowls were gone. Bedroom closet half empty. Ethan's suits removed. Not taken, removed. That distinction mattered. They believed they were entitled. I reached the study less, the room Diana always called the digital cave. She never liked that Ethan worked in there. Said it made him distant. Said it made him obsessed. She never understood that building something takes isolation before it creates stability. The desk looked untouched. Good. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Then I sat down. The grief came in waves. Now not sharp. Not loud. Just heavy. I opened the bottom drawer. Receipts, warranty papers, tax documents. Then I opened the second drawer, and there it was. The slim black folder Ethan once handed me casually after dinner. Just in case, he'd said with a grin. For peace of mind. At the time, I had laughed. Now, I understood. I pulled it out carefully. The postnuptial agreement was crisp, notarized, clean, in the event of the husband's death. All jointly owned assets, including real estate, shall transfer fully to Rachel Monroe. It was airtight behind. It was something else. A sealed envelope, my name written in Ethan's handwriting. Rachel. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I'm sorry you're dealing with this alone. If Mom tries to challenge anything, show this to Angela. She doesn't know about the refinance. I kept it that way on purpose. You deserve security, not permission. And Rach, don't argue, just win." I folded the paper slowly. He knew. On some level, he knew exactly how fast she would move. And he prepared that. Realization did not comfort me, it hardened me. 3 days later, the official probate challenge arrived. Diana was not subtle, she claimed. Ethan may have signed the refinance during a period of emotional instability. Ethan may have been under undue influence. Ethan may not have fully understood the legal implications. The wording was precise, designed to plant doubt without evidence. Angela, read it twice. She's fishing, she said. For what? For anything that suggests he wasn't in full control? My stomach tightened. 3 months before Ethan died. He had come home, shaken from a meeting, said he forgot where he parked, forgot a client's name. Blamed stress. I had brushed it off. Had Diana heard about that? Was she building a case around it? That night, I returned to the study. I opened every file drawer. I pulled every folder. And then I remembered something. Neurology. Ethan had muttered one evening while scrolling through his phone. Just ruling things out. I tore through the unopened mail pile on the shelf. There a letter from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. My hands shook as I opened it. Cognitive assessment results. Normal range. No signs of early decline. No impairment. Detected? I exhaled slowly. Proof.clean.clinical. Angela smiled when I forwarded the scan. She just lost her foundation. The courtroom was colder this time. Diana did not look at me. Her attorney spoke carefully, layering emotion into his tone. A grieving mother concerned about irregular transfers. Angela responded with documentation, deed, transfer date, refinance, approval, income, statements, neurology, results, post-nuptial agreement. Then she did something I did not expect. She introduced the timeline: Ethan's business decline, mortgage, restructure, stabilization period, full recovery. This was strategic financial planning. Angela said evenly. Not coercia. The judge leaned back. Do you have medical evidence suggesting mental impairment? She asked Diana's attorney. He hesitated. No, Your Honor. Then this petition lacks merit. Gavel dismissed again. Diana's composure cracked for the first time, only slightly, but I saw it. She had not expected resistance. She had expected collapse. I thought that would be the end. It wasn't single quotes T. 2 nights later, I woke to headlights sweeping across the bedroom wall. I sat up slowly. The engine idled outside. 7:04. A.M. stepped to the window and looked through the blinds. Diana's car, parked across the street, engine running. She wasn't texting, wasn't on the phone, just watching. I did not panic. I did not call the police. I put on Ethan's old sweater, walked downstairs, opened the front door, and stepped onto the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand. I met her eyes. She held my gaze for 5 seconds. Then she drove away. No wave, no gesture, just retreat. It was intimidation, but it was weak because she had nothing left legally. Only presence, and presence without power fades quickly. The funeral was the final test. I had removed her from the official list, but Diana had never respected boundaries. She arrived dressed in black lace, Jocelyn beside her. They slipped into the back pew, performing grief. Angela leaned toward me. Do you want security? No, I said. Stood and walked down the aisle. Every eye followed. The chapel smelled like lilies and cedar polish. When I reached her, I kept my voice level. You tried to erase me, I said quietly. You don't get to mourn publicly what you tried to destroy privately. Her jaw tightened. I gave birth to him, she replied. And he chose me, I answered. She blinked. You don't get to rewrite that. Jocelyn shifted beside her. Mom, she whispered. Let's go. Diana looked at her daughter, stunned, but she stood, and she left. No scene, no spectacle, just heels clicking against chapel tile. The service resumed. And for the first time since Ethan died, I felt control. Not over grief, but over narrative. Spring came early that year. The house began to feel like mine again. Not legally, emotionally. I painted the hallway a soft gray. I replaced the kitchen hardware. I reorganized the pantry back to its original order. Small acts of restoration. One afternoon, while clearing the last of the boxers they had brought inside, I found something strange. A bank envelope wedged beneath the couch. Not mine. I opened it. A printout of Ethan's old business account summary. Highlighted sections, handwritten notes. In Diana's script, she had been digging, trying to find leverage. I took it to Angela. She's looking for financial weakness, Angela said. If she can't attack the house, she'll try the estate. She won't find anything, Angela looked at me carefully. Are you sure? That question lingered. I went back through everything. Insurance policies, retirement, accounts, joint savings, and then I noticed something. A small life insurance rider one Diana did not know about. Primary beneficiary, Rachel Monroe, amount. Enough to secure the house entirely. Enough to close the mortgage. Balance without strain. Enough to remove any future leverage. Ethan had added it quietly after the refinance. He never told his mother. He never needed to. The check arrived 3 weeks later. I did not celebrate. I paid off the mortgage in full. And then I did something else. I installed a new security system. Not because I was afraid. Because I was finished being reactive 2 days after the mortgage cleared. Another envelope arrived. No return address. Typed words. This house will never be yours. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked into the backyard. The soil was soft from spring rain. I dug a small hole beside the rosemary bush Ethan planted. The year we moved in, I placed the letter inside, covered it, pressed the dirt down with my palm. Some things are better buried by early summer. The garden bloomed. Marigolds, mint. Lavender. Bahas. Felt lighter not because grief had faded, but because fear had. One morning, I stepped onto the porch, with coffee in hand. No cars idling across the street. No envelopes in the mailbox. No legal notices. Silence. The clean kind. Diana had retreated fully, because she had lost legally, she had lost strategically, and most importantly, she had lost control. What she never understood was this. The house was never the victory. The refinance was never the weapon. The courtroom was never the revenge. What Ethan left me was foresight, preparation, protection, and a final instruction. Don't argue, just win. And I did. By midsummer, the house no longer felt invaded. It felt reclaimed. Not in a dramatic way, not in a triumphant way. In a quiet, deliberate way. The locks had been replaced. The curtains restored. The paint refreshed. The air different. But grief does not follow renovation schedules. It arrives in small, inconvenient moments. When I reached for the second coffee mug, when I turned to tell Ethan something about the news, when I heard a creak in the hallway, unexpected footsteps. The difference now was this. The house was mine, not legally, not symbolically, completely. I thought Diana had finally accepted that. I was wrong. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished meeting a client about redesigning her dining room when Angela called. She's filed something else, she said calmly. What now? She's contesting the life insurance payout. I went still. On what grounds? Claiming you concealed financial information from the estate. I almost laughed. She doesn't even know the policy exists. She does now. I understood immediately. Someone had talked. The insurance company likely contacted. Next of kin during standard procedure. Diana had probably been informed she was not the beneficiary, and that had triggered something primal. She has no claim, Angela continued. You were listed sole beneficiary. It's clean. Then why file? Angela paused. To exhaust you. That landed harder than any legal phrase. Diana could not win, so she would. Attempt to drain time, money, energy. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about endurance. The next hearing was shorter, more procedural, less theatrical. Diana's attorney presented arguments about transparency. Alleged omission of information during probate discussions. Angela responded with documented Thailand's beneficiary forms, policy dates. The judge barely entertained it. Beneficiary designation is binding, she ruled. Case dismissed. Second attempt failed. But when we stepped outside, Diana did not retreat. She approached me directly, up close. Close enough that I could see the faint lines beneath her foundation. "You think you're safe?" she said quietly. "I am," I replied. "You don't understand what family means?" "I do," I said calmly. "It means respecting boundaries." Her jaw tightened. "You'll be alone in that house." I looked at her steadily. I already was. That was the moment something shifted. Not in her and me. I was no longer defending. I was observing. A week later, something unexpected happened. Jocelyn knocked on my door alone. She looked smaller without her mother beside her. "You can't tell Mom I came," she said immediately. I stepped aside and let her in. She stood awkwardly in the living room, eyes scanning the restored space. "You changed it back." "Yes," she swallowed. "She didn't expect you to fight." "I know." Jocelyn exhaled slowly. "She's angry because she thought she would control everything. The house, the funeral, the narrative." I waited. "She doesn't know how to lose." I noticed. Jocelyn looked at me carefully. "You didn't manipulate Ethan." "No. He told me about the refinance," she said quietly. I went still. When after the business scare, "He said you handled everything. That you were stronger than he was." The room felt heavier. "She thinks you tricked him," Jocelyn continued. "But he trusted you more than anyone." I nodded once. "I didn't come to argue," she said. "I came to say, I'm sorry." For the first time since all of this began, something inside me said, "Thank you," I said. She hesitated at the door. "She'll stop eventually," she added, "when she realizes she can't win." I closed the door behind her. I hoped she was right. Autumn arrived quietly. The marigolds faded. The rosemary thickened. The house settled. No more envelopes. No more court filings. No more idling cars. Until one evening the doctor returned home after a late design consultation and found the front gate slightly ajar. It had not been that way when I left. I stepped carefully onto the porch. The new lock was intact, the alarm system armed, but something felt wrong. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, until I reached the study. The bottom drawer was open, only slightly, just enough to notice. My breath slowed. I stepped closer. The black folder was still there, but Ethan's handwritten note was missing. My chest tightened. Not panic. Violation. She had been inside. Not legally, not visibly, but deliberately. I did not call the police immediately. Instead, I walked to the security panel and pulled the footage. 2 days earlier, 3:14 p.m. Diana. Using an old spare key she must have duplicated before being removed. She entered quickly, walked straight to the study, left 10 minutes. Later I felt something cold move through me. Not fear, finality. She wasn't fighting for property anymore. She was fighting for a narrative. If she could destroy the note, she could destroy proof that Ethan anticipated her behavior. It was psychological. I called Angela. She trespassed. I said, "Do you have proof?" "Yes." "Good." The restraining order was filed the next morning. And this time, it was permanent. The court appearance was brief. Diana did not deny entering the house. She claimed she was retrieving sentimental items. The judge was unmoved. "You have been repeatedly informed that this property is not yours," she said evenly. "Further intrusion will result in criminal charges." Diana did not look at me. She stared straight ahead. When the order was granted, she stood slowly, and for the first time since Ethan died, she looked smaller. Not defeated, diminished. There is a difference. Winter returned. A full year had passed. The house felt steady now, not just reclaimed or rooted one evening. I sat by the fireplace with a cup of cinnamon tea. Ethan used to say cinnamon made grief softer. I never believed him until now. The silence in the house no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. Thought there had been no more letters, no more filings, no more attempts. Diana had finally accepted reality, not because she changed, because she ran out of leverage. I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cold. Again the porch light glowed softly. I looked at the new front door. Solid, secure, mine. What she never understood was this. The house was never about walls. It was about preparation. Ethan prepared, I executed. And in the end, I did not win by destroying her. I won by refusing to collapse. 8K words. Final section. Spring came again. The garden bloomed fuller, this time not fragile. Established. I planted new marigolds, added thyme along the walkway, placed a wooden bench beneath the maple tree. Some evenings I sit there and talk to him. Not because I expect answers, because I no longer feel interrupted. Grief did not disappear, it matured. It stopped screaming and started breathing. Diana never returned. Not to the porch, not to the mailbox, not to the courtroom. Her silence is not forgiveness. It is surrender, and I do not need more than that. This house is mine, not because a judge said so, not because paperwork proved it, because I stood in the doorway when the key would not turn, and instead of begging, I prepared. Instead of arguing, I won. And instead of shrinking, I stayed. That is what he left me, not property, not money, not protection. He left me foresight. He left me trust. He left me the quiet certainty that I could hold my ground without raising my voice. The sweetest revenge is not humiliation. It is permanence. And permanence is exactly what she could never take.